It was a warm, sunny morning when Jack decided to visit his daughter at school. He hadn't seen her in days, and today felt like the perfect day to check in. As he walked towards the school, the sound of children laughing and playing filled the air. He smiled, imagining his little girl, Lily, in the middle of it all, excited and full of life. The school bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Jack walked toward the cafeteria, his footsteps echoing through the empty hallway. He was eager to see Lily's classroom, but he was about to discover something that would change everything. Before we dive into this story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe. The cafeteria was bustling with students, but Jack quickly spotted his daughter sitting at a table near the back. Her bright eyes lit up when she saw him, and she waved eagerly. Jack's heart warmed at the sight of her. She was his whole world. As he approached her, Jack noticed the lunch trays being served. The teacher, Ms. Reynolds, was handing out the meals. Jack could smell the strange, unfamiliar scent wafting through the air. It didn't smell like food. It smelled wrong. Jack sat down beside Lily and gave her a big hug. "Hey, sweetie," he said, ruffling her hair. Lily smiled up at him, but her face was slightly pale. "Are you okay?" Jack asked. Noticing she wasn't as energetic as usual. "Yeah, Dad," Lily replied softly. "I'm just not hungry. The lunch, it's weird today." Jack turned his attention to the teacher, who was still serving the students. She handed Lily a tray, and Jack looked down at it. What he saw made his stomach twist. The tray was filled with something that looked wrong. It wasn't a proper meal. There was a strange, mushy substance in the center. It looked like a bowl of grayish goo. Jack frowned, feeling a wave of concern. He had been expecting something like spaghetti or a sandwich, but this was far from what he'd imagined. Lily poked at the goo with her fork. "I don't like it, Dad," she said. Her voice barely above a whisper. Jack could hear the sadness in her tone, and it broke his heart. Jack stood up quickly, scanning the room for the principal or another teacher. His mind raced. This wasn't just some strange food, something was off. He could feel it in his gut. His protective instincts kicked in. He needed to get to the bottom of this, and fast. Without saying another word, Jack turned to Ms. Reynolds. "I need to talk to the principal now," he said, his voice firm and urgent. Jack and Ms. Reynolds walked briskly to the principal's office. As they passed by the classrooms, Jack noticed that the other kids seemed just as confused and uncomfortable as Lily. Some were poking at their food. Others looked as though they were trying to hold back tears. The principal, Mr. Carter, was on the phone when they arrived. He looked up as they entered, his expression serious. Jack didn't waste any time. "This lunch isn't right," Jack said, his voice shaking with concern. "I don't know what that food is, but it's dangerous. You need to do something about it." Mr. Carter listened quietly, then sighed. I don't know what happened. We've had some complaints about the lunch program lately, but nothing like this." Jack's mind raced. Complaints? But this was something worse. "Much worse. I'm calling 911, Jack declared. "This isn't a coincidence. Something's wrong with that food." Jack grabbed his phone, his hands trembling. As the phone rang, the sound of the operator's voice on the other end seemed far away. It felt like time had slowed down. He tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. 911, what is your emergency?" the operator asked. "There's something wrong with the food at my daughter's school," Jack said quickly. "It's not right. I need help. I think it's dangerous. Please send someone immediately." The operator's voice was calm but urgent. "We'll send someone right away. Stay where you are and keep your daughter safe." As Jack hung up, his mind was spinning. What was going on at this school? Who was responsible for this? He looked at Lily, who was sitting quietly at a table. Still staring at her tray. A few minutes later, the doors to the cafeteria burst open. A group of paramedics rushed in, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced. What if it was already too late? The paramedics immediately began to examine the children, their faces grim. Jack stood by Lily, watching as they moved from table to table, checking each child's food. They asked questions, and some children began to cry. Lily clutched Jack's hand tightly. "I don't want to eat that anymore, Daddy," she said, her voice trembling. Jack squeezed her hand and nodded. "You're not going to have to, sweetie. Everything's going to be okay. Just stay close to me." The paramedics moved quickly, speaking to the children and their teachers. Jack's eyes followed them as they worked, his mind filled with worry. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening. One of the paramedics, a woman with short blonde hair, walked over to Jack. "Sir, we need to take a sample of that food," she said, pointing at Lily's tray. "Can you please help us?" Jack nodded, his stomach churning. He handed over the tray, watching as the paramedic carefully placed the strange, mushy substance into a container. "We'll get this tested right away," she said, giving him a reassuring smile. But Jack couldn't help feeling a sense of dread. What if it was already too late to save everyone? As the paramedics continued their work, Jack couldn't stop thinking about the lunch. He looked at the children, most of them sitting quietly, clearly frightened by the sudden attention they were receiving. Lily leaned against Jack, her small body trembling. "What's happening, Daddy?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jack kissed the top of her head. "I don't know, sweetie," he said softly. "But I promise you, we're going to figure it out. You're safe now." Just then, the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Help was on the way. The doors to the cafeteria opened again, and 2 more paramedics entered. This time, they weren't alone. Behind them, a man in a suit stepped in, his expression serious. "That's Mr. Davis," Ms. Reynolds whispered to Jack. "He's from the health department. He's been investigating the school lunches for the last few weeks." Jack nodded, watching closely as Mr. Davis approached the paramedics. "What's the status?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "We're collecting samples," the paramedic replied. "We're going to run some tests immediately." Mr. Davis looked over at Jack. "We need to get to the bottom of this. This could be something serious." Jack felt a sudden chill run down his spine. Something told him this was more than just a mistake or an accident. He watched as the paramedics worked, collecting samples from different trays. Moving quickly, the man in the suit, Mr. Davis, spoke quietly to the principal. "We're going to need to speak with the school's food provider," he said. "This could be part of a larger issue." Jack's mind raced. A larger issue? What could that mean? Who was responsible for this? He was desperate for answers. Minutes later, Mr. Davis turned to Jack. "Sir, we're going to need to speak to you," he said, his tone serious. "We need to know everything you saw this morning. Your daughter's health may depend on it." Jack nodded, his hands shaking as he led Lily toward a quiet corner of the cafeteria. He wasn't sure what he was about to hear, but he knew it wouldn't be good. "I'm listening," Jack said, trying to steady his breath. Mr. Davis glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "The food you saw today, it's part of a batch from the supplier we've been investigating. We've been receiving complaints for weeks now about strange meals being served to kids in schools across the district. But this is something different." Jack's heart sank. "What do you mean, different?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Davis paused for a moment before answering. "There's been a contaminant in some of the food, a dangerous substance that could cause serious harm. We believe it may have been intentionally added to the supply. We're still working to confirm the source." Jack's blood ran cold. He turned to Lily, her innocent eyes wide with confusion. "Daddy, what's happening?" she asked again, her voice trembling. Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "I'm not sure yet, honey. But I'm going to make sure we're okay." The paramedics had now gathered everyone in the cafeteria, ready to take the children to the hospital for tests. The tension in the air was thick, and Jack could feel his heart pounding in his chest. As Jack followed Lily to the bus, he couldn't stop thinking about what Mr. Davis had said. The idea that someone might have intentionally harmed the children with the food made his stomach turn. Lily clung to his side, her small hand gripping his tightly. I'm scared, Daddy, she whispered. Jack squeezed her hand reassuringly. It's going to be okay, sweetheart. We're going to make sure you're safe. The bus doors closed, and they were on their way to the hospital. Jack's mind raced as he thought about the strange lunch and the possible dangers lurking behind it. When they arrived at the hospital, the atmosphere was tense. Medical staff rushed to meet the children, taking them inside one by one. Jack stayed close to Lily, refusing to let her out of his sight for even a moment. Everything's going to be okay, Jack kept telling her, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. The nurses asked them to wait in a small room while they ran tests on the children. The walls were bare, and the faint hum of machines filled the silence. Jack couldn't help but feel his anxiety grow. What if they were too late? Hours passed. Jack sat by Lily's side, watching her as she played quietly with her fingers. She was being so brave, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. Finally, a doctor entered the room, her face solemn. Jack stood up immediately, his heart racing. We have some answers, the doctor said, looking at Jack and then at Lily. The food contained a harmful substance, but luckily, it looks like the children will be fine. We're monitoring them closely, but it seems like the effects were not as severe as we first feared. Jack let out a sigh of relief, but he wasn't ready to relax just yet. The doctor's next words made his stomach drop. The source of the contamination, though, is still unclear. We're investigating, but this might just be the beginning. Jack's mind was spinning as he sat back down next to Lily. The relief he felt about her health was overshadowed by the deeper, darker mystery that was unfolding. Who was behind this? What were their intentions? I'm not letting this go, Jack whispered to himself. Whoever did this is going to pay. As the doctor left the room, Jack made a silent promise to himself and to Lily. He would find the truth, no matter what it took, as the hours ticked by. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was far from over. He held Lily's hand tightly, trying to focus on her, but his mind kept racing back to the strange events of the day. The lunch, the food, the contamination, it all seemed like a bad dream. The doctor returned with more news. We're keeping all the children under observation for now, she said, her face serious. But we've contacted the authorities. This is more than just an accident. It's a case of possible food tampering. Jack's heart sank. He felt a chill run through him. Tampering? You mean someone did this on purpose? The doctor nodded. We believe so. The substance in the food was not something that would normally be in school lunches. We're working with the police to investigate further. Jack stood up, the weight of the situation sinking in. He needed answers. He had to find out who was behind this, and why. Jack decided to speak with Principal Harris before he left the hospital. He needed to know how the school was handling the situation. As he walked into the principal's office, he was met with a somber look. We're doing everything we can to get to the bottom of this, Jack, Principal Harris said, his voice shaky. But we don't have all the answers yet. The school's food supplier is being investigated, and we've already pulled the remaining meals from the kitchen. Jack's eyes narrowed. Who's the supplier? What are you doing to make sure this never happens again? The principal hesitated before answering. We've used this supplier for years, but it's clear now that there's something wrong. We're looking into other options, but right now, our priority is the safety of the kids. Jack felt a mix of anger and frustration. That's not good enough. Someone tried to poison my daughter. I need to know who's responsible for this. That evening, Jack sat at the kitchen table, his mind racing with thoughts. He couldn't stop replaying the events over and over in his head. His daughter, his sweet Lily, she had nearly been harmed. The fear he felt for her was overwhelming. His phone rang, breaking his thoughts. It was an unknown number, but Jack answered anyway. Hello? Mr. Blake? A voice on the other end asked. This is Detective Lawson with the police department. We need to talk about the incident at your daughter's school today. Jack's stomach tightened. What's going on? Have you found anything? We're still investigating, the detective said. But we've just learned something important. The supplier for the school lunch program has a history of health violations. We've been tracking them for months. Jack felt his pulse quicken. What kind of violations? There's been food contamination before, Detective Lawson explained. But this is different. Someone could be intentionally adding harmful substances to the food. We think it's more than just a careless mistake. Jack's fists clenched. So, this could be a deliberate attack on my daughter and the other kids. It's too early to say for sure, the detective said. But we're treating it as a serious case. We'll need your help with the investigation. Jack didn't hesitate. Whatever you need, I'm in. The next morning, Jack woke up early, still feeling the weight of the previous day's events. He hadn't slept much, his mind too preoccupied with thoughts of the investigation. What kind of person would harm innocent children? And why? As Jack and Lily were eating breakfast, his phone buzzed again. It was Detective Lawson. We've got a lead, the detective said, his voice low. We've tracked down the supplier. And we believe they're hiding something. We need you to meet us at the warehouse this afternoon. Jack's heart raced. I'll be there. I want answers. After breakfast, Jack prepared to leave, but Lily stopped him before he could go. Daddy, where are we going? She asked, her eyes wide with concern. Jack kneeled down and looked her in the eye. We're going to make sure that everyone is safe, sweetheart. We're going to find out who did this, and we'll make sure it never happens again. Lily nodded slowly, though Jack could tell she was still scared. He gave her a reassuring smile before heading out the door. Later that afternoon, Jack arrived at the warehouse with Detective Lawson. It was a large, cold building, the kind of place that felt secretive and unwelcoming. The detective led him inside, where a few officers were already combing through the space. Is this where they pack the food? Jack asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. Yes, the detective replied. This is where the lunches are prepared and shipped out to schools. We believe this is where the contamination happened. As Jack looked around, he noticed something strange. The place was poorly lit, and there were boxes stacked haphazardly. Some of the boxes had been opened, their contents spilling out onto the floor. Wait, Jack said, his voice sharp. What's this? He pointed to a small, sealed bag on the ground. It looked out of place, far too clean compared to the rest of the chaos in the warehouse. Detective Lawson crouched down to examine it. This doesn't belong here, he muttered. This looks like evidence. Jack felt a chill. What is it? The detective carefully opened the bag, revealing a small vial of liquid. This is the substance that was in the food, he said, his voice grim. We've just confirmed it's highly toxic. Someone intentionally put this in the food supply. Jack felt his stomach turn. So, it was someone inside the warehouse. Someone who works here. The detective didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to one of the officers. I need a list of employees. He said. We need to figure out who had access to this and why. Jack's mind raced. This was no accident. Someone wanted to harm his daughter, and all the children at her school. Back at the police station, Jack sat in a small room, waiting for answers. Detective Lawson had just left to speak with the warehouse employees, and Jack was left alone with his thoughts. His mind kept going back to the vial of toxic liquid. How did it end up in the food? And who would do something so evil? As the minutes passed, Jack couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The deeper he got into this investigation, the more dangerous it seemed. But there was no turning back now. He had to find out who was responsible, for Lily's sake. And for all the other children. The door opened, and Detective Lawson walked in, his face serious. We have a suspect, he said, his voice heavy. And I think you're not going to believe who it is. Jack's heart stopped. Who? Principal Harris, the detective replied. Jack's jaw dropped. What? Yes, the detective continued. We found out that Principal Harris has been involved with the supplier for years. And it looks like he may have been covering up something much worse. Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. Principal Harris, the trusted figure who had been in charge of the school for years, was now a suspect in a case that was already too twisted for his mind to wrap around. Are you sure about this? Jack asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. Principal Harris? He's the one who runs the school, the one who's always been there for the kids. How could he be involved? Detective Lawson nodded, his face grim. It's complicated. We've found links between him and the food supplier. Financial transactions, shipments, all sorts of things. It's clear now that he was working with them, and he might have known about the toxic substance in the food. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. But why? Why would he do this to the kids? To my daughter? We don't know yet, the detective replied. But we're digging into his motives. There's a lot at stake here. If this is true, then Principal Harris might be more dangerous than we realized. Jack's mind was reeling, unable to fully grasp what was happening. He thought back to all the times he had trusted Harris, the man who had always seemed so concerned for the well-being of the children. How could he have been behind something so horrific? With the new lead in hand, Detective Lawson and Jack drove to the school. The tension between them was thick, both of them unsure of what to expect. Could Harris really be involved? And if so, what had driven him to do something so terrible? When they arrived at the school, Jack's eyes immediately found the principal's office. He could almost feel Harris's presence, as if he was still inside, orchestrating everything from behind closed doors. Detective Lawson turned to Jack, "We're going to have to confront him. It's the only way we'll get answers." Jack nodded, his fists clenched. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face the man who had once seemed like a pillar of the community, but now felt like a monster hiding in plain sight. As they walked down the familiar hallway toward the principal's office, Jack's mind flashed back to the many school events and parent-teacher meetings where he had spoken to Harris, never once suspecting that the man in front of him could be involved in such a sinister plot. The door to the principal's office creaked open. Principal Harris looked up, his expression faltering when he saw Detective Lawson. "Detective, Jack, what is this about?" Harris asked, trying to hide the anxiety in his voice. "We need to talk, Principal Harris," Detective Lawson said, his voice calm but firm. "It's about the food that was served to the children yesterday." Harris's face went pale. He knew exactly what they were referring to. Jack stepped forward. "What did you know about the food, Harris? Were you involved in poisoning the kids? Did you know that my daughter could have died?" Principal Harris shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room. I don't know what you're talking about." Detective Lawson leaned in closer. "We have evidence linking you to the supplier. And we know that you've been covering something up. You're not going to get away with this." Harris swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of his desk. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was supposed to be a business deal, something to make money for the school. But things went wrong. I never meant for anyone to get hurt." Jack's heart pounded. "So, you did know about it? You knew the food was contaminated, and you still served it to the kids?" "I didn't know." Harris protested, his voice growing more frantic. "I never wanted this. The supplier, they told me it was safe. I thought it was a regular delivery, until it was too late." "Too late?" Jack repeated, his anger boiling over. "You don't get to say that. You put my daughter's life in danger. All those kids." The tension in the room grew thick. Jack could barely control his emotions, but he knew one thing for sure: he needed the truth, and he needed it now. Principal Harris broke down, his face crumpling as the weight of his guilt finally hit him. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know it would be like this. It was supposed to be a simple deal, a way to make the school some money. The supplier promised everything would be fine, and I thought I was helping the kids. I thought I was doing the right thing." Detective Lawson's eyes softened for a moment. But his tone remained stern. "You didn't do the right thing, Harris. And now, because of your mistake, children could have died. This goes beyond negligence. This is criminal." Jack's thoughts raced. It was hard to process everything. Principal Harris had tried to do something good, but his actions had led to disaster. He had put the trust of the children at the school in the hands of someone who didn't care about their safety. "Do you understand the consequences of what you've done?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse. I didn't know, Harris repeated, his voice shaking. I didn't know the food was contaminated. I never wanted this to happen. Detective Lawson turned to Jack. We need to take him into custody. He might not have done it on purpose, but he still played a part in this. Jack nodded slowly. It wasn't an easy decision, but he knew it had to be done. Harris needed to face the consequences of his actions, even if he hadn't fully understood what he was getting involved in. As Harris was led away by the officers, Jack stood there, staring at the man who had once seemed like a father figure to the school. The shock of it all was still fresh, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Lily was safe. She had made it through the night, and the doctors assured Jack that she would recover fully. But Jack knew that things had changed forever. The trust he had once placed in the school, in the system, had been shattered. As he left the principal's office, Jack's thoughts turned to the other children who had been affected. The damage was done. But he wasn't going to stop until every last truth had been uncovered, until every child involved was safe and the people responsible faced justice. The road ahead would be long, but Jack wasn't about to back down. He would fight for his daughter. And he would fight for every other child who had been hurt in this nightmare. The investigation had only just begun. And Jack was ready to see it through, no matter where it led. The days after Principal Harris's arrest were a whirlwind. Jack barely had time to process the shocking turn of events before the media caught wind of the story. Cameras were everywhere, reporters shouting questions at him, asking for his side of the story. It felt like the whole world was watching. Jack tried to ignore them, but he couldn't avoid the harsh light of the public eye. It was a Monday morning when the school district called for a press conference. Jack was invited to speak, though he wasn't sure what he would say. He didn't feel ready to be in front of so many people. But he knew that this was bigger than him. It was about the kids, about keeping them safe. Walking into the conference room, Jack felt a lump in his throat. The room was filled with flashing lights and murmurs, everyone eager for a statement. The district spokesperson stood at the podium. And the reporters were ready to pounce. Jack took a deep breath, his heart pounding. When it was his turn, he walked up to the microphone. The reporters went silent, waiting for him to speak. I want to start by saying this, Jack began, his voice steady but full of emotion. What happened here, what nearly happened to my daughter, to all the children in this school, should never have happened. This isn't just about one person making a mistake. This is about everyone who trusted the system to keep our kids safe. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. The silence was deafening. We've all been let down, but we won't let this slide. We won't stop until every person responsible for this is held accountable. The room was still. Jack's words hung in the air. Jack's words resonated with the public, and the outcry against the school system grew louder. Parents began demanding answers. News outlets reported on the scandal from every angle. It seemed like the whole city was in turmoil. Jack wasn't prepared for the backlash that followed. Some people praised him for speaking out, but others criticized him for bringing such attention to the school. There were whispers in the community, people who thought Jack was overreacting, who believed that Harris didn't deserve to go to jail. It was just a mistake, they said. The principal didn't mean for it to happen. Jack was torn. On one hand, he felt vindicated by the support he was receiving. On the other, the doubt and judgment from others weighed on him heavily. He just wanted to protect his daughter and the other kids. He didn't want to make enemies. But the truth was, some people would always try to defend the system, even when it failed. One night, as Jack sat alone in his living room, a knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find a woman standing on his doorstep. She was in her late 30s, with kind eyes and a somber expression. Are you Jack? She asked. I'm Megan. My son is in the same class as your daughter. I wanted to thank you. Jack blinked, confused. Thank me? For what? Megan stepped closer. For speaking up. My son got sick too, but he wasn't as lucky as your daughter. He's still in the hospital. We don't know what's going to happen. But hearing you speak out, knowing that someone cares, it means everything to us. Thank you for doing this. Jack's throat tightened. He hadn't known how far this had reached, how many families had been affected. He hadn't realized that his fight was not just for Lily, but for all the children. "I'm sorry about your son," Jack said, his voice soft. "I'll do everything I can to make sure this doesn't happen again." Megan gave him a grateful smile before turning to leave. As Jack closed the door, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about one person. It was about the community, about making sure something like this never happened again. As the investigation continued, more details emerged about the supplier involved in the food scandal. The company had a long history of shady practices, but it had managed to fly under the radar for years. Now, thanks to the tireless work of Detective Lawson and the district's internal investigation team, more people were starting to ask questions about who was really behind the food distribution. Jack learned that the supplier had cut corners in their operations, using cheaper, unsafe ingredients to save money. They had ignored warnings about the risks, all in the name of profit. The food wasn't just unhealthy, it was dangerous. And it had been delivered to hundreds of schools, including the one Lily attended. Detective Lawson briefed Jack on the new findings. "We've traced the supplier's actions back several months. It seems they've been cutting corners for a while now. It's clear that they were aware of the risks, but they chose to ignore them." Jack clenched his fists. So, this wasn't just a mistake. It was a calculated risk. They knew what they were doing. Lawson nodded. "Exactly. And they've been making a lot of money from it. We're getting closer to putting the pieces together. But we need more evidence." Jack felt a burning anger inside him. The more he learned, the more it seemed like this was all about greed. The supplier had put children at risk to make a profit. And the school, led by Principal Harris, had been complicit. He wasn't going to let them get away with it. The more Jack learned about the supplier, the more he realized how deep the corruption ran. It wasn't just one bad decision, it was a series of choices that led to this disaster. And now, the families were paying the price. Jack joined forces with other parents whose children had been affected. Together, they formed a coalition, a group determined to seek justice for their children. They organized rallies, called for stricter food safety laws, and pushed for more transparency in school food programs. As the group gained momentum, Jack became a leading voice for the cause. He spoke at rallies, met with lawmakers, and even appeared on local TV to advocate for change. The district began to feel the pressure. With the public outcry growing, they had no choice but to take action. Investigations into the supplier's other contracts were launched, and tighter regulations were put in place to ensure that nothing like this could happen again. But Jack knew the fight wasn't over. It was just the beginning. As the weeks passed, things slowly began to return to some sense of normalcy. Lily had recovered from her ordeal, and the school had implemented new safety measures to ensure that food would be properly checked before it was served. But the emotional scars were still there. Jack had spent months fighting for justice, but now, he realized that it wasn't just the fight that mattered, it was the healing that needed to come next. He spent more time with Lily, making sure she knew how much he loved her and how proud he was of her strength. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Lily looked up at Jack and smiled. "Daddy, do you think things will be okay now?" Jack kissed her on the forehead, his heart swelling with love. "Yes, sweetheart. Things will be okay." He knew the road to healing would take time. But as he looked at his daughter's face, he felt a sense of peace. They had made it through. And no matter what came next, they would face it together. As the new school year approached, the air was thick with anticipation. The investigation into Principal Harris and the supplier was far from over, but some semblance of normalcy had returned to the school. Jack's heart swelled with pride when he saw how the other children were adjusting. They were resilient, just like Lily. The school district had enacted stricter food safety standards. All food suppliers were now required to undergo thorough background checks, and school lunches would be inspected regularly. It felt like a small victory, but it was a step in the right direction. Jack took Lily to school on the first day of the new term. The usual nervous excitement filled the air as children ran to greet their friends. But today, it felt different. There was a sense of caution mixed with the joy of a fresh start. The trauma was still fresh for many, but everyone was doing their best to move forward. As they stood at the entrance of the school, Lily squeezed Jack's hand. "I'm a little nervous, Dad." Jack smiled and knelt down to her level. It's okay to be nervous, sweetheart. But remember, you're strong. You've been through so much, and you came out even stronger. You can handle anything. Lily nodded, her eyes filled with determination. I know, Dad. I'm ready. With one last hug, Jack watched as she ran off to join her class. He felt a lump in his throat. She was growing up, stronger and braver than he had ever imagined. And he couldn't be more proud. Even as Jack watched Lily join her classmates, the road to rebuilding trust in the school system would take much longer. He knew that not everything could be fixed with a few regulations. There were deeper wounds that needed healing. The parents who had rallied with Jack were working tirelessly to ensure that the school remained vigilant. They held monthly meetings, checking in with the administration to make sure the safety standards were being met. The food supplier who had been responsible for the tainted meals was under investigation, and they had filed lawsuits to seek justice for the children who had been harmed, but Jack realized that it wasn't just about punishment or regulations. It was about restoring trust between the parents, the children, and the school. It would take time, but he was willing to fight for that, just as he had fought for his daughter's safety. One afternoon, Jack was invited to meet with the new principal, Mrs. Stevens. She had replaced Harris, and Jack had heard good things about her. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he agreed to the meeting. As Jack entered her office, Mrs. Stevens greeted him with a warm smile. Mr. Anderson, thank you for coming. I know this has been a difficult time for everyone, but I want you to know that we are committed to making this school a safe and welcoming place for all students. Jack nodded, appreciating her sincerity. I just want to make sure this never happens again. The kids deserve better. Mrs. Stevens placed a hand on the desk, her expression serious. We all do, Mr. Anderson. And that's why we're making changes. The safety of our students will always come first. Jack could feel a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. The road ahead was long, but he wasn't walking it alone. He had the support of parents, teachers, and most importantly, his daughter. Months passed, and the community slowly began to heal. The school continued to implement stricter safety measures, and the district promised to never again compromise on the welfare of the students. But even as the physical damage was addressed, the emotional healing took time. Lily had started seeing a counselor to help her process what had happened. It wasn't just the food scare, it was the fear she had felt, the worry she carried after seeing her father so upset. The counselor helped her talk through her feelings, and Jack could see a change in her. She seemed more at ease, and her confidence was growing again. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Lily put down her fork and looked at Jack. Dad, she said quietly, I don't want to remember the bad things that happened. But I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. I want to help. Jack smiled, proud of his daughter's strength. What do you mean, sweetheart? Lily looked thoughtful. I think maybe I can help other kids understand what happened. So they know it's important to be safe and to speak up when something's wrong. Her words struck Jack deeply. His little girl had grown up in ways he hadn't realized. She was turning her pain into purpose, using her experience to help others. It reminded him of why he had fought so hard in the first place. This wasn't just about protecting Lily, it was about protecting all children. You're right, Lily, Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. You've always been strong, and now you're even stronger. And I'm so proud of you. Lily smiled, her eyes bright. We're going to make sure everything's okay, Dad. The school year came to an end, and while the scars of the past were still present, there was a sense of hope in the air. Jack knew there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew that they were stronger than before. He continued his work with the Parent Coalition, ensuring that the changes they had fought for remained in place. They had made a difference, and Jack was determined to keep fighting for the safety and well-being of all children. One afternoon, as Jack picked Lily up from school, he noticed a group of children playing on the playground. They were laughing, running, and simply enjoying their childhood. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt a sense of peace. This was why he had fought so hard, to ensure that children could be children, safe and free from harm. Lily ran up to him, her face flushed with excitement. Dad! Guess what? I'm going to be the class representative next year." Jack's heart swelled with pride. "That's amazing, sweetie. I'm so proud of you." As they walked to the car, Jack realized that while they couldn't undo the past, they had found a way to move forward. Together, summer had arrived, bringing with it a sense of peace. Jack and Lily spent their days enjoying simple pleasures. They took walks in the park, went on bike rides, and spent quiet evenings at home. The world around them seemed calmer now, as if they were finally emerging from the storm, but Jack never let his guard down. He knew the fight for safety at schools wasn't over, and he remained involved in advocacy, speaking at school board meetings and staying in touch with other parents. He had learned the importance of vigilance, and while things had improved, he wasn't willing to let history repeat itself. One afternoon, while enjoying ice cream on the porch, Lily turned to Jack with a serious look on her face. "Dad, I want to help with the parent group next year. I want to make sure the other kids are safe, too." Jack was taken aback by her words. She was only 8 years old, but her determination was stronger than most adults. "Lily, you already help by being brave and speaking up. You don't have to do more." "But I want to, Dad. I think it's important that kids have a voice. I've learned that it's okay to speak up when something's wrong," she said. Her words filled Jack's heart with pride. His daughter had always been strong, but now she was channeling that strength into something bigger. She was becoming a leader in her own right. "All right, kiddo," Jack said, smiling. "We'll figure out how you can help. Together." As the new school year began, Lily became more involved in the parent group. Jack watched her grow as she took on new responsibilities. She helped organize meetings, spoke to other children about the importance of food safety, and even made posters to spread awareness. Lily's voice was young, but it was powerful. The parent group, now stronger than ever, continued to push for more oversight in the school's food safety practices. Jack had made it his mission to ensure that no other child would ever face the same danger his daughter had. The fight was still ongoing, but they were making real progress. One evening, as Jack tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Dad, what if we could help other schools too? Like, what if we could tell them how important it is to be safe with their lunches?" Jack smiled, brushing her hair back gently. "I think that's a great idea, Lily. You're already helping a lot of people just by speaking up. Who knows? Maybe one day, kids all around the country will know how to stay safe in school." Lily grinned, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I hope so." As Jack kissed her goodnight, he realized that, in many ways, they had come full circle. The nightmare of that fateful day was behind them, but it had inspired change. Lily had found her purpose in the fight for safety, and Jack was proud to stand beside her. A few weeks later, Jack received an invitation from a nearby school. The parent group had heard about the work Jack and Lily were doing, and they wanted to learn from their experiences. Jack was hesitant at first, unsure of how they would be received, but Lily's excitement was contagious. She wanted to help, and he couldn't say no to her enthusiasm. The day of the visit, Jack and Lily arrived at the school early. The gymnasium was filled with parents, teachers, and even a few students. They were there to listen, to learn, and to make sure that what had happened to Lily would never happen again. As Jack looked around the room, he saw the same concern he had felt so many months ago. But there was something different now, a sense of hope. Lily stood beside Jack as they spoke, her small voice carrying through the gym. "I'm just a kid, but I know that it's important to be safe. I want to make sure no one else has to go through what I did." Her words left the audience speechless. Jack couldn't help but feel a lump in his throat as he watched her. She had come so far. The girl who had been scared and uncertain was now standing up, speaking out for others. Later, as they were leaving the school, Jack pulled Lily into a hug. "I'm so proud of you, sweetie. You're doing something amazing." Lily smiled up at him. "I just want to help, Dad." And Jack knew, without a doubt, that she was. One voice at a time, they were making a difference. By the time winter rolled around, the parent group's efforts were paying off. They had worked tirelessly to ensure that food safety was a priority, and their influence had extended to several schools in the area. Jack and Lily had become symbols of hope for other parents, showing that even the smallest voices could make a big impact. The community had rallied together in ways Jack hadn't expected. What started as a personal fight for his daughter's safety had grown into a movement that reached beyond their town. Parents, teachers, and students alike were coming together to ensure that schools were safe for everyone. At a community event celebrating their progress, Jack stood beside Lily, his heart full of gratitude. "We've come so far, and we couldn't have done it without each and every one of you. Together, we've made our schools safer, and together, we will keep fighting for the children's future." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jack looked down at Lily, her face glowing with pride. This journey had been long and difficult, but they had made a real difference. The battle wasn't over, but they had come further than they could have ever imagined. As the years passed, the memories of that terrible day slowly faded. But the lessons they had learned remained with Jack and Lily forever. The experience had shaped them both, teaching them about the power of perseverance, the importance of community, and the value of speaking out for what is right. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, Lily, now a teenager, turned to Jack with a thoughtful expression. "Dad, I think I want to keep doing this. I want to help make schools better, safer. I want to keep fighting." Jack smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You've got the heart of a warrior, Lily. I know you'll make the world a better place." And as the years passed, Jack knew that their work wasn't over, it had only just begun. Together, father and daughter, they would continue to fight for a better, safer world, one step at a time. As Lily grew older, her passion for food safety and child advocacy deepened. What began as a simple desire to protect her own school had blossomed into a larger vision. She started speaking at local conferences, sharing her story and the lessons her father had taught her about the importance of standing up for what was right. It was clear that Lily wasn't just a survivor, she was a leader. One afternoon, Jack received a call that made his heart skip a beat. It was from a national food safety organization. They had heard about Lily's work and wanted to partner with her to bring food safety education to schools across the country. Jack was overwhelmed with pride. This was the opportunity they had worked for, a chance to change the world on a larger scale. Lily, always humble, was hesitant at first. "Dad, it's a big step. Do you think I'm ready?" Jack took a deep breath and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I've seen you grow, Lily. You're more than ready. You've already changed so much for the better. This is just the beginning." With Jack's support, Lily agreed to partner with the organization. They started to build a curriculum, teaching children about healthy eating habits, the importance of food safety, and how to speak up if something felt wrong. What started as a small, local effort was now reaching thousands of students across the country. Months passed, and the program gained traction. Schools all over the country began implementing Lily's curriculum. Teachers, parents, and students alike were praising the impact it had on raising awareness about food safety and empowering children to take responsibility for their health. One day, as they were preparing for a nationwide event to celebrate the success of the program, Jack sat back and reflected on the journey. He thought about the terrifying moment when he had walked into that classroom and found Lily in danger. It seemed like a lifetime ago, yet the memory of that day still stirred something deep inside him. But now, when he looked at Lily, he didn't just see his daughter. He saw a young woman who had turned pain into purpose. She had faced adversity with bravery and had used her experience to build something positive that would last for generations. Jack was overwhelmed with gratitude. "You've changed the world, Lily. You've given children a voice, a chance to be heard." Lily smiled, the weight of their journey settling in her heart. "We did it together, Dad. It's not just my fight, it's everyone's. And we're still fighting, every single day." The day of the nationwide event arrived, and Jack and Lily were both filled with excitement and nerves. It was a milestone moment, one they had been working toward for years. The auditorium was packed with students, parents, teachers, and members of the media. It was the perfect moment to showcase how far they had come. As Lily stood on the stage, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had spoken to thousands before, but today felt different. Today, it wasn't just about food safety, it was about the journey they had all shared. She looked out into the audience and saw the faces of so many people who had supported her and her father through everything. It wasn't just a personal victory, it was a shared one. "Thank you all for being here," Lily began, her voice steady and strong. "This journey started with one small act of speaking up. And now, together, we've created a future where every child's safety matters. But this is only the beginning. The fight isn't over, and with all of you by my side, we will continue to make sure our schools are safe for everyone." The crowd erupted into applause, and Jack couldn't hold back his tears. He had always known that Lily was destined for greatness, but seeing her on that stage, making a real difference, filled him with an indescribable sense of pride. As the years went on, Jack and Lily continued their work in different ways. Jack, now older, took on more of a mentorship role, guiding new parents and students who were inspired by their story. Lily, on the other hand, expanded her efforts even further, collaborating with health experts and policymakers to ensure that food safety and child advocacy remained at the forefront of national discussions. They had become a symbol of resilience and hope. Their story had touched countless lives, and the ripple effect of their actions could be felt everywhere. Schools were safer, children were more empowered, and families were stronger. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch watching Lily work on a new project, he smiled. They had come so far together. From that terrifying day in the school cafeteria to this moment of peace and purpose, their journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. Lily looked up from her work and caught his gaze. "Dad, do you think we'll ever be done?" Jack chuckled softly. "I think there will always be more to do. But that's the beauty of it. We get to keep making a difference. One step at a time." Lily nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." And with that, father and daughter sat in silence, knowing that their work was far from over, but that they had already changed the world in ways they could never have imagined. As Lily continued to grow in her advocacy, she was invited to speak at schools and conferences across the world. Every new audience brought fresh challenges and opportunities. One day, she received an invitation to speak at a United Nations event about child safety. It was a momentous occasion, and Jack knew it was the culmination of everything they had worked for, when Lily stood at that podium in front of world leaders. Her message was clear: no child should ever be in danger because of something as basic as food. Every child deserves to feel safe, supported, and heard. Her words echoed across the room, and for the first time in her life, Lily realized just how far their story had reached. The world was listening, and it was ready for change. Jack, watching from the audience, couldn't contain his pride. He had always believed in his daughter's potential, but seeing her on that global stage, leading the charge for change, was something beyond words. Jack and Lily's journey continues to inspire people everywhere. Their fight for food safety, for children's voices to be heard, has become a movement that shows the power of one person, and one family, to make a difference. Jack no longer has to worry about his daughter's safety, not because the world is perfect, but because together, they have worked to make it better. And as they look ahead, hand in hand, they know that their story is far from over, because sometimes, all it takes is one voice. One child. One parent. To change everything, and that's exactly what Jack and Lily did.